Hello, listeners. This is Joel Wright, and I'm hosting the Slope Leader Development Podcast. It's a podcast focusing on how educators are integrating leadership development into education so that all students develop the leadership skills that pay dividends on all dimensions of one's life, from educational engagement to career readiness to citizenship and more. In this episode, you'll hear how Tom Heck, a lifetime educator and professional trainer, uses a design thinking process to engage high school students in learning about math and computer science in real-world situations. Tom takes students through the 5 steps of design thinking: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. This is a great example of how educators can integrate leader development into an educational experience.
Tom Heck, welcome to our show. As I said, this is about, how can we get leadership out there so that all young people have access to leadership?
Thanks for having me, Joel. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be speaking to any and all educators who are out there. And when I think of educators, I think of both traditional classroom educators, YMCA, Boys and Girls Clubs, 4-H. There's so many people who are working with kids who are in the classroom and working with kids outside of the classroom, summer camp professionals. So when I think of our audience, I'm thinking pretty broadly.
Tell us about your work and what you do. So you are currently working with Makey Makey. That is an extension of this experiment that you actually did.
You mentioned Makey Makey, and some of our listeners may know this company. Some of them may not. This Makey Makey thing is a little electronic device that's $50, and it's about the size of a credit card. And a couple of graduate students at MIT invented this thing about 7 years ago, and in an effort to help more people explore and become inventors, and what these two guys would call invention literacy. In other words, helping more people become literate around and understand how the world is made, and with the effort or with the idea being, if you understand how the world works and how the world is made, especially the technological world, that it's more likely that you're going to be able to interact with it and manipulate it and change it and create new things and make the world a better place. Much like if you're illiterate with language, in other words, you don't know how to read or write, you have fewer options available to you in the world. But if you know how to read and write, and the better you know how to read and write, you have way more options available to you in the world. I saw it on Kickstarter, which is a platform to raise money for products that need to launch and perhaps don't have big backing, a big company behind them. And so here you have 2 college students who want to make something. They put this thing on Kickstarter, and it was at the time one of the most successful Kickstarter campaigns. And I saw it and I thought, I'm going to buy one. I wasn't sure why. I just saw it was cool. And if anybody who goes to Makey or goes to YouTube right now and types in Makey Makey, M-A-K-E-Y, M-A-K-E-Y, you can see tons of videos how this thing works. A couple days after buying this thing, I had lunch with a friend of mine who teaches math and computer science here in Asheville. He's since retired. And this was in 2014. And we were talking about teaching and learning, which you and I often talk about.
You have some thoughts and opinions on this. And so you guys
we're talking
right?
and he's saying, I was asking him about how he's teaching computer science, which is oftentimes a very, frankly, dry subject. It's oftentimes done students at their keyboard looking at a screen. And Not that there's anything wrong with that. Going back to this conversation with Joe, I said, what if your students went in and did this and then did the interview and then began to learn coding, which is what he wanted them to learn, but learn coding by building an app that solves a specific problem that this nonprofit has. So now we're involving. Joe is still in that scenario, going to teach coding. It's going to be app development and coding, right, but coding nevertheless. But now they're working on empathy and working on a project with a real deliverable to a client that has a real need. And if these high school students build an app that solves this problem, the benefits are going to be not just for the grade, but to real people on the receiving end of this nonprofit. So Joe was like, wow, I like this idea, Tom. How about you come in and volunteer to lead that? And I said, well, oh man, I wish I had enough time to do that. I can't dedicate that much time to come in. But I have this other idea. And the two of us spoke. I thought of this Makey Makey thing that I just purchased, and for their listeners, when you go to and watch videos about this thing, essentially what it does is you plug it into your computer, any computer. There's no software. It allows you to connect alligator clips, wires, to anything conductive, and then when you touch that conductive thing, a pie pan, water, a plant. And it fools the computer into thinking that you've touched keys on the keyboard. Well, at first that doesn't sound like such a really revolutionary thing. But what I thought was, what if these high school students got an opportunity to code a game, build the interface for that game for students, elementary school students in this case, living with severe and profound physical and cognitive disabilities?
Yeah. So, Tom, what I hear is your friend Joe almost suckered you into doing something with his students because he wasn't sure how to do it. And because you've done so much with experiential learning, right? You've done so much with engaged learning. And you want ultimately students to have a real world experience. You said, Joe, let's get out of the classroom. Let's go down the street to this school, and let's learn from these students and you have some assistive technology needs and see if we can help in some capacity. And so how did that went? It sounds like, did you propose the idea to students? And how did this all, how did this all come to life?
I have to say that there were a lot of unknowns. Luckily, I had a friend who was the principal at the elementary school. This is a public school in Asheville, and where one wing of the elementary school serves kids with some of these severe challenges. Like there was a student who was paralyzed from the neck down, and he used a button that was attached to his wheelchair, and it had an articulating arm, and you could position the button such that as he tilted his head, he could turn the button on and off. And it was one of the ways he could engage with computers and also just communicate.
So how does this connect back to the subject that they're going to be studying, right? So I think you said it was computer.
I'm going to take a step back. So when Joe and I talked about this project, I said, okay, let's see what we can do. I'll make the arrangements with the elementary school. But on our very first day that I worked with his student, we loaded up the bus and drove down to the elementary school. Why? Because I wanted them to experience the first step of design thinking, which is empathy. Why is empathy important? It was so critical, Joel, for this project because, one, there were so many unknowns, and I didn't have much time with the students, and so this whole project was compressed into essentially a few days, spread out over a couple of weeks, but still compressed. And I needed to get their buy-in. And there was no way I was going to get their buy-in to do this challenging project if I just told them a story.
Thinking about that experiential learning component, it's, how do you get them in this space and be able to witness and observe and let curiosity and inspiration start to draw them in?
Yeah.
So that first step of empathy being almost getting out into the environment.
Well, and so this was the hard part for me, frankly, because I had no background in working with special needs kids. I'd been around special need kids, but as far as like the depth of this project, no, I didn't have much experience, but we had the buy-in of the special ed teachers. So the high school students go in for the first part of this project, and we spent a class period at the school, riding the bus, going to the school, getting back on the bus, all in an hour and 15 minutes, interviewing the student or getting to meet the students, getting to meet the special ed teachers, and seeing these devices. You said, sometimes these things break. Oh my gosh, these things, the assistive technology devices that the average special ed teacher is buying, they break all the time and they're expensive. And so these teachers had 3 plastic laundry baskets filled with broken devices that they couldn't bear to throw away because they're expensive. And they were like, oh, maybe somebody will come along someday and fix these. So the high school students saw this. They saw, there was a student we worked with cerebral palsy who was no longer using the computer because he had broken all of the devices that he would normally use. Not on purpose, but because his fine motor skills were not very good. He had gross motor skills. So instead of just touching something gently, he would, just hit it. And you hit something plastic enough and it's going to break. So we left the school and the students, and this is when I knew that we had, that the project was off on the right foot, because we're riding the bus back and the students are like, oh my gosh, that is so sad to see these broken devices and kids not getting to learn. And all those things are cheaply made and they're so expensive. And I thought, good, I have them.
So, I was going to say, what was the reaction of the students? I mean, you just started to hit on that, but, how quickly did that come about? I would imagine if I were going in there as a teenager, I might feel uncomfortable.
We were all uncomfortable. And we talked about that. And the special ed teachers were so great. They said, we understand that a lot of people, young people, adults, are uncomfortable around the kids that we work with every day. But you know what? They put their pants on one leg at a time. We're all just trying to make it in the world. And, in short order, to these high school students' credit, they moved from the place of being intimidated to being in a place of, I wonder if there's something we can do.
Tom, the next stage of design thinking is generally, how do you define the problem, right? So you went from empathy, you got the kids engaged there, and then all of a sudden they're on their own already starting to brainstorm and come up with, solutions, which is getting ahead. But, how did they really define the problem here?
Well, when we went back, so I had 5 class periods. Class number 2, all those kids that you met last week, I'd like to challenge you and return to that same classroom in 4 more class periods, this class period and 3 more. And I'd like you to think about a student that you met, and I would like you to design a game for them, code a game, and then I'd like you to design an appropriate game controller for that student. And so, for example, there was a student that we worked with who had been in a car wreck with his parents, and his head had been hit, I think, against the window, and it had somehow impacted his ability to balance. And so he was doing physical therapy what one of the teachers said is, he's sort of reluctant to do his physical therapy like he should. If you could gamify his physical therapy, that would be amazing. In other words, he's getting his physical therapy done. He doesn't realize it because he's playing a game. And so we gave out different scenarios. The student with cerebral palsy had a different challenge. So the students thought, okay, we're going to do this. And it was really easy to do that right at this point because they had empathy for these kids. And that's when I started to share with them a little bit about the technology, this Makey Makey device, which is really easy to use. And so that was defining the challenge.
And what I hear there too is it wasn't just like we're just going to design a new mouse or something for the students. It was understanding specific needs of an individual student, and also not just, their challenge, cerebral palsy being one of them, but it's also like, oh, well, what's the game that might be engaging for that person or motivating for that person? So doing physical exercise the right way, right? In a more engaged, gamified way. So there's almost layers of defining the problem there around specificity to the user, specificity to the activity that you're going to design to. And so, yeah, that's great. And so you had a couple of classes to do this, right? What did design start to look like as they moved into the ideate phase?
Yeah,
right?
So this is where the fun part is. It's sort of like if anybody's been crafting or just using basic cardboard skills and tape and things that are conductive, aluminum foil, and so you start to brainstorm and test ideas quicker rather than sit down and spend a lot of time building your very first prototype. I encourage the students to prototype quickly and test. And so we went from sort of playing around with ideas and thinking about students and to moving to the prototyping and then testing ideas of our prototypes, with the ultimate goal being on class period 5, again, so Tuesday, Thursday, and Tuesday, going back to the school. I said, that's our goal. Your goal is, the two of you, I had people working in teams of 2, is to be ready to deliver your working prototype to the students so that we can get real feedback. And you can see how things go. And so this was the big unknown, really, is that could a group of students with no previous experience doing human-centered design, could they actually make something that worked? That a student with who needs assistive technology to interact with computers, could they build something that when that student sits down, that they have success in playing this game and using the computer? And so that was the big question. I didn't know. And in fact, the principal, Dr. Gordon Grant, he said, Tom, really the worst case that would happen is that none of these projects work. And really, even if that's the worst case scenario, think about that, is that you have high school students going in, learning to care about the situation of somebody else, a stranger for all intents and purposes, trying their best to design a solution, coming back and delivering a solution that maybe doesn't work. And still what you have is, he saw it as a win-win. Even the special ed teacher said, you know what? We're so siloed in our school. We work on our own schedule that even if none of these things work, it's still a win because we get so few visitors in our classroom.
So the special ed teacher was just excited to have guests coming in that would expose people to their world, also interact with students in a different way. Yeah, that's just that exposure alone is great. But from what I've heard is they actually needed to design something, right? They needed to, actually build something. So
To learn more about how this story ends, you'll have to listen to episode 2. But thanks for joining us for Slope Leadership episode 1. I hope you're hearing threads about how this project is helping students learn about a subject, computer science and math, through a community project that provides a real-world learning experience, and it simultaneously provides a practice leadership opportunity. As a way to help you reflect on how leadership development is taking place, consider the questions. How are students learning to lead themselves in this experience? How are they learning to lead with others? What skills are they learning that will help them lead in the future? I hope this podcast is providing an opportunity to you to consider how could leadership development be integrated into schools so that more young people or all young people have access to leadership development. Thanks for listening. We're always curious about what your thoughts are, so please provide us feedback. And again, thanks for listening.